In 1970, you could walk into a Plymouth dealership in America and order a car with an engine so powerful that your insurance company might refuse to cover it. Not because the car was illegal, not because the engine had failed any safety test, but because the actuaries, the people who calculated risk for a living, who spent their careers looking at statistics and making cold mathematical decisions about probability, had looked at this particular engine in this particular car and concluded that the combination was simply too dangerous to price at any reasonable premium. The engine was the 426 Hemi, the car was the Plymouth Cuda, and together they produced one of the most extraordinary and most short-lived machines in American automotive history. 652 cars. That is how many 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cudas were built with a manual gearbox. 652 in a country of 200 million people, in a market that moved millions of cars every year. Today, one of those 652 cars sold at auction for $3,500,000. This is the story of how something that extraordinary came to exist, and why it was gone almost before anyone had time to appreciate it. Plymouth and the Barracuda. To understand the Hemi Cuda, you have to understand Plymouth. And to understand Plymouth, you have to understand where it sat in the Chrysler Corporation hierarchy in the 1960s. Plymouth was Chrysler's volume brand, the everyday car for everyday buyers. Practical, affordable, reliable, not exciting. Dealers sold Plymouths to families who needed a dependable car at a reasonable price and had no particular desire for anything beyond that. This was fine as a business model. But by the early 1960s, Plymouth's management was watching with increasing frustration as Ford captured the imagination of young American buyers with the Mustang. Chevrolet was eating Plymouth's lunch with the Camaro. Even Pontiac, another mainstream brand without any particular sporting heritage, had the GTO. Plymouth needed a performance car, urgently. Their answer was the Barracuda, launched in 1964. Actually arriving a full 2 weeks before the Mustang, a fact that Plymouth's marketing department made much of, and that history has largely ignored because the Mustang so completely dominated the conversation that the Barracuda's timing advantage was irrelevant. The first-generation Barracuda was attractive but underpowered. A compact car with a large fastback rear window and modest engine options, it had the look of a performance car without quite the substance. The second generation, arriving in 1967, improved on this considerably. Better styling, better engine options, growing credibility in the muscle car market. But it was the third generation, launched for the 1970 model year, that transformed the Barracuda from a credible competitor into something genuinely legendary. For 1970, Plymouth completely redesigned the Barracuda from the ground up. New platform, new body, new identity. They shortened the wheelbase, widened the track, and created a car with proportions that many automotive historians consider among the most perfect of the muscle car era. The Cuda, a shortened nickname that Plymouth formalized as a distinct model designation for the high-performance variants, had a wide, aggressive stance, a long hood that promised violence, and a short rear deck that gave it a weight-forward visual tension that the competitors couldn't match. It looked like it was moving at speed while standing still, and then they put the Hemi in it. The 426 Hemi. The 426 Hemi was not a new engine in 1970. It had been in development and limited production since 1964, when Chrysler introduced it specifically for NASCAR racing. And it had won immediately, so convincingly in fact, that NASCAR banned it after a single season, ruling that an engine available only for racing was incompatible with the series' production-based rules. Chrysler's response was to make it available in production cars, which forced NASCAR to allow it back. The engineering behind the Hemi was, by any standard, extraordinary. The name referred to hemispherical combustion chambers, a dome-shaped design, as opposed to the wedge-shaped chambers used in most contemporary V8 engines. The hemispherical design allowed for larger valves positioned opposite each other, which meant better airflow in and out of the combustion chamber. Better airflow meant more efficient combustion. More efficient combustion meant more power from the same displacement. The 426 cubic inch displacement was, in itself, enormous. But it was the Hemi's breathing ability, its capacity to consume and expel air and fuel with a ferocity that conventional engines couldn't approach, that produced the performance figures. Factory rated at 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. Every engineer, every journalist, every buyer who had any meaningful understanding of engines in 1970 knew that 425 was a deliberately conservative figure. Chrysler had reasons, primarily insurance-related, to understate the output. Independent dynamometer testing consistently placed real-world Hemi output between 470 and 500 horsepower at the crank. In a car that weighed around 3,400 pounds, the power-to-weight ratio produced quarter-mile times in the low 13s at over 107 miles per hour. These were not street-legal drag racing figures. These were simply what the car did when you pushed the accelerator to the floor on an ordinary road. And here is the detail that made it truly extraordinary. In 1970, you could walk into a Plymouth dealer, order a Cuda with the 426 Hemi, and drive it off the lot. No racing preparation required. No track day restrictions. No special license. Just the engine, the car, and the road. That freedom was exactly what ended it. The 1970 Hemi Cuda arrives. When the 1970 Hemi Cuda hit showrooms, the automotive press reacted with something between awe and disbelief. Car and Driver tested a 4-speed manual Hemi Cuda in early 1970. Their quarter-mile time was 13.7 seconds at 104 miles per hour. They described the driving experience as violent in the best possible sense and noted that keeping the rear wheels from spinning at anything below 50 miles per hour required either extraordinary skill or very careful throttle management. Motor Trend called it the most serious street performance car Plymouth has ever built. Superstock and Drag Illustrated, the publications read by the people who actually went to drag strips on weekends, simply said it was the fastest production car available from any American manufacturer at any price. The styling matched the performance. Plymouth offered the 1970 Cuda in a range of what they called high-impact colors that were unlike anything else on the market. Plum Crazy Purple, Hemi Orange, Vitamin C, Go Mango. These were not subtle paint choices. These were colors designed to be seen from a distance, to announce the car's presence before the exhaust note reached you. A Hemi Cuda in Plum Crazy Purple with a black hood, a shaker hood scoop, and side stripes was, by any measure, one of the most visually aggressive production cars ever sold in America. The base price with the Hemi engine option was approximately $870 to the base Cuda price, a figure that seems almost absurd against what those same cars sell for today. But the price was never really the problem. The problem was the insurance. The insurance war. By 1970, the American insurance industry had been watching the muscle car market with growing alarm for several years. The statistics were not good. Young men, the primary buyers of high-performance muscle cars, were the most accident-prone demographic on American roads. High-powered vehicles in the hands of that demographic were producing accident and fatality rates that insurers found unacceptable from a pure risk management perspective. The industry's response was to price high-performance cars out of the reach of young buyers through insurance premiums, not through legislation, not through lobbying for production restrictions, simply by making the cost of insuring certain engines prohibitive. For the 426 Hemi, several major insurers took the position that they would not offer coverage at any price for drivers under a certain age, in some cases under 30. Others quoted premiums so high that the annual insurance cost exceeded the monthly car payment. This was not a coordinated conspiracy. It was the independent but convergent response of multiple organizations looking at the same actuarial data and reaching the same conclusion. But the effect was identical to a ban. If a 22-year-old mechanic in Detroit could buy a Hemi Cuda for $4,000 but couldn't get insurance for it at a price he could afford, he bought the 440 Magnum version instead, or the Camaro SS, or the Chevelle. Any car that his insurer would cover at a reasonable premium. Plymouth felt this in the sales figures immediately. Car that should have sold in the thousands moved in the hundreds, and the insurance crisis was only part of what was coming. Only 652 were ever built. The final production figures for the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda are, even now, almost difficult to process. Total Hemi Cuda production for 1970, 652 cars with the manual 4-speed gearbox, an additional 284 with the automatic torque flight transmission. 936 Hemi Cudas in total across both transmission options. In a model year when Plymouth sold over 300,000 vehicles across all models, in a country of 200 million people, in the peak year of the American muscle car era, 936. To put that in perspective, Ferrari in that same year produced more than twice as many cars as Plymouth produced Hemi Cudas. The scarcity was not entirely intentional. Plymouth had anticipated higher demand and had prepared for a larger production run, but the insurance crisis, combined with the high price of the Hemi option, meant that actual buyer orders fell far short of projections. Dealers who had ordered Hemi Cudas for their lots found them sitting. Buyers who wanted them couldn't get insurance. Buyers who could afford the insurance were few in number. And so 936 cars were built, scattered across dealer lots from Maine to California, most of them eventually sold at some discount to whatever buyer could be found. Of those 936 cars, automotive historians estimate that somewhere between 60 and 80% have survived in some condition. The rest were crashed, crushed, parted out, or simply disappeared over the decades. What remains is genuinely rare, and rare in the collector car market eventually becomes priceless. The 1971 model, the last of the breed. Plymouth continued the Hemi Cuda into 1971, and the final year of production tells its own story. The 1971 Hemi Cuda was, if anything, a more dramatic-looking car than its predecessor. New styling details, a revised front end, updated side graphics, subtle but meaningful refinements gave it a slightly more aggressive appearance. But the world it was being sold into had changed even in 12 months. Insurance premiums had continued to rise. Chrysler, like every American manufacturer, was facing pressure from incoming emissions regulations that were incompatible with the raw, high-compression engineering of the Hemi. The Clean Air Act of 1970 was not an abstract future concern. It was actively shaping engineering decisions at every American automaker. And the buyers who might have stretched to a Hemi Cuda in 1970 were finding that the economics simply didn't work in 1971. Total 1971 Hemi Cuda production, 108 cars with the manual gearbox, 722 with the automatic, 830 cars in total, a slight decline from 1970, but more revealing in the composition. The shift toward automatics reflected buyers who wanted the Hemi name and the visual presence without the full commitment to performance driving. After 1971, Plymouth did not bring the Hemi back to the Cuda. The 1972 model continued with lesser engines. By 1974, the Barracuda name itself had been discontinued. The Hemi Cuda had existed in its true form for exactly 2 model years. 1,756 cars. That is the entire production run of a car that now defines the peak of the American muscle car era. What killed the Hemi Cuda? The death of the Hemi Cuda was not a single event. It was the collision of several forces that had been building simultaneously. The insurance industry, as we have discussed, had made the car functionally inaccessible to its primary target market. A performance car that young men cannot afford to insure is, commercially speaking, already dead. The emissions regulations introduced by the Clean Air Act of 1970 required automakers to reduce combustion temperatures and introduce exhaust gas recirculation systems that were fundamentally incompatible with the Hemi's high-compression, high-temperature combustion cycle. To make the Hemi emissions compliant would have required an engineering investment that Chrysler calculated was not commercially viable given the projected sales volumes. The fuel. The 426 Hemi required high-octane leaded fuel to operate at its designed compression ratio. The transition to unleaded fuel that was beginning in the early 1970s, driven by the introduction of catalytic converters, would have required the Hemi's compression ratio to be reduced, cutting power significantly and undermining the entire premise of the engine. And then October 1973 arrived. The OPEC oil embargo, fuel prices tripling overnight, a muscle car that drank premium fuel and returned perhaps 8 miles to the gallon became not just impractical but socially embarrassing. The Hemi Cuda was perfectly engineered for a world that was ending as it was being built. The last one rolled off the line in 1971 and took the muscle car era with it. What survivors are worth today? And now the part that requires a moment of quiet. Because the numbers attached to surviving Hemi Cudas are not car prices, they are art prices. A 1970 Hemi Cuda convertible, and only 9 were built as convertibles, sold at Barrett-Jackson in Scottsdale for $3,500,000. A 1971 Hemi Cuda convertible, even rarer with only 7 known to exist, sold at the same auction for $3,725,000. A non-convertible 1970 Hemi Cuda coupe with the 4-speed manual documented with its original build sheet and in exceptional original condition sold in 2023 for $1,100,000. For a car that cost $4,000 new, the appreciation is not accidental. It reflects genuine scarcity. These are not cars that were produced in modest numbers and forgotten. They are cars whose production numbers were so small that genuine collector-quality examples are rarer than most post-war Ferraris, rarer than most Shelby Cobras, rarer than almost anything that the American muscle car era produced. The people who held on to them, who restored them instead of selling them in the 1980s and 1990s when values were modest, are sitting on what may be the single greatest return on investment in American automotive history. 652 manual gearbox 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cudas. In 55 years, that number has not grown. It cannot grow. The tooling is gone. The era is gone. The world that produced them is gone. What remains are the survivors, in museums, in private collections, in the hands of people who understand what they have and treat them accordingly. The Hemi Cuda is not just a car. It is a document. Evidence that for a brief, violent, extraordinary moment, American engineering pointed itself entirely at the question of how much power a car could carry, and answered it without apology. The Hemi Cuda is the rarest of the rare. But it was not the only American car that Ford, GM, and Chrysler quietly walked away from when the era ended. In our last video, we told the story of the Ford Thunderbird, a car that Ford had 50 years to get right and chose to end without a single word of farewell. That story is right here, and if you want to be here every time the Vault Motors opens a new story, subscribe. New videos every Tuesday and Friday.